2 years ago, my husband Andy and I decided it was finally time to buy a house, so on April 1st we moved into a 4,200 square foot colonial house. The catch was that it was a stone's throw away from the freeway and that the area was known for its crime more than anything else. Andy said it was just a stepping stone. We'd bank a year's worth of mortgage, hope the housing market keeps rocketing and move again in a year. There were some flaws in his plans, mainly money, but I didn't say anything. I figured we'd both adjust to like it there. The first few weeks went smooth, and me and the husband got to unpacking and introducing ourselves to the neighbours. Maybe it was the threat of crime, and that there was comfort and purpose in knowing who you lived next to, but whatever it was, our neighbours were incredibly friendly. We felt at home quite quick, and while there was some shocks, we made games out of them to take the fear away. With the pops that permeated the night, we had the game where we guessed whether the sound was fireworks or gunshots. There was a homeless problem there, for sure, but they minded their own business. Our neighbours seemed to see right through them. They acted as if they were ghosts, like they weren't even there. Hell, everyone did. I'd smile and say hello in passing. The least I could do was treat them like human beings. One night after a movie, I was at the sink washing the popcorn bowl. The window looks out to the backyard, which was heavily wooded for a city lot. When it was dark out, I could see only a sliver of what was outside beyond the reflection of myself in the glass. I frowned at the shadow of a tall dark stump. I don't remember a tree being there. I swayed on my feet to see past my reflection. In between the bushes, nearly out of sight, a man was standing still, staring back at me. My heart leaped, and I dropped the bowl where it crashed into the sink. "You okay in there, honey?" Andy shouted from the living room. "Yeah." I kept my eyes on the man and said nothing to Andy, not wanting to alarm him. "I'm gonna take the trash out." "All right." I walked by the trash without touching it and opened the back door. "Hello?" Outside, the wind was blowing hard, and behind the branches of the buckhorn, I could see a man stood there, waving wildly to me. "What do you want?" I stepped forward to try and show that I wasn't scared, but it was the tepid step of prey, like I was better planting my weight to run. The man said nothing. I took another step forward, more confident this time, but jumped when my movement activated the motion light. I composed myself and yelled, "This is private property. If you don't leave, I'm calling the police." Now, this was the emptiest of threats, and everybody in the neighbourhood knew that. The man walked forward a few paces to where I could see him better. He was very tall and wore a heavy wool overcoat that stretched all the way to his ankles. He kept walking towards me. My brain was shouting, but I froze in fear. What do you want?" He stopped just in front of me. A white scar starred across his black skin just below the chin. He was at least 6'6", but the coat that ran the entire length of his body made him gigantic. His face was recently shaved and gaunt. He held out his fist at arm's length, and when he uncurled his fingers, cupped in an enormous palm, was a pill. "I don't have any drugs," I said. His face didn't change any. There was no want or question in his eyes. You want me to take it?" I pointed at his hand, but his expression stayed the same. I reached out and gently plucked the pill from his palm, and I held it between my forefinger and thumb. It was just a pill capsule. Whatever had been inside had been emptied. What do you want?" I asked again. He opened his mouth, revealing the severed stump of a tongue, and then he widened the enormous whites of his eyes. He began to mouth something, but being tongueless, I couldn't tell what. But my blood ran cold, because I felt certain it was some kind of curse. Please just leave." He turned and stepped into the night, and I watched the bushes sway in his wake as if he was a giant parting his way through the woods. The next day was Saturday, and I was determined to find out if anyone knew anything about this tall man. I walked to the strip mall and I asked some of the homeless in the area, but as soon as I began to describe him, they all looked at the ground and shook their heads. The pattern was repeated with every other homeless person I could talk to. On my way home, I stopped by two men working on a car at the end of a driveway. "Hey, this may sound a little crazy, but do you guys know of a tall fella around here that wears a giant coat?" They both started laughing. "Sorry to waste your time," I turned to go. No. One of them waved me back. "You're talking about a really big motherfucker, right?" He raised his hand to signify. "Yay high, black coat, nasty scars." "Yeah," I nodded. "Well, that's Tall Chuck. What you want to know about him? You see him in your recycling?" "No. Why?" "Tall Chuck's a can man. He makes his living that way." I nodded. "He was acting weird in my backyard last night." "Weird how? Was he just looking like his weird self?" No, he was staring at me from outside, and when I went out, he tried to say something or mouth something. Both of their brows rose. Are you saying that Tall Chuck tried to communicate with you? Yeah. They both looked at each other. Tall Chuck talks to nobody, and by talks I mean communicating in any kind of way. He cut his own throat to never talk again. The other chimed in. That's just a rumour. Tall Chuck showed up in this neighbourhood about 20 years ago, and no one knows where he came from. And the man can't tell you. Yeah, people put all kinds of legends to those scars. Some say it was a dog that bit him, but I never seen no dog that'll slice your tongue out. If he doesn't communicate with anyone, how come he has the name Tall Chuck? Well, that's what my mama would call him. She used to tell me to watch my tongue, or Tall Chuck will take it. What do you think he wanted with me? They both shrugged. No clue. But you be sure to tell us when you find out. They bent back to their work and I thanked them and went on, far less assured than when I'd first set out. The next several days there were no sign of Tall Chuck, but I began to fall ill. It was a headache at first, but soon I had heart palpitations and body aches that I almost let take me to the emergency room. I assured myself that there was no such thing as curses. Why was I letting one strange encounter with a homeless man dominate my every thought? Andy was working late recently, and when I had the house to myself at night, I would stand at the kitchen window and stare into the backyard. I was obsessed, and it wasn't long before I did see him again. I was wrapped in a blanket, filling the teapot at the sink, when I saw him standing in the same place as before. I dropped the teapot and ran to the back door. Hey! My head felt light, and I was in that same kind of drunken state where your fear hardly speaks to you. I scampered throughout the backyard over to him. What do you want with me? Tall Chuck was staring at me. He gestured with his scarred neck for me to follow. I looked at my bare feet, but he was already walking. Hey, just leave us alone! I stepped after him cautiously. When I got past the bushes where I could see the alley, I saw him standing near the trash cans. I ran after him. You, I don't want to ever see you back here, okay? With our size difference and a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, I'm sure I looked to him like some angry little hobbit. He certainly didn't act intimidated, and I can't blame him. Tall Chuck crossed the alley and sat on a crumbling retaining wall. He gently tapped the stone next to him for me to sit. I'm not fucking sitting. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out something. It was an envelope. Then he put the letter into his other hand and reached in again and pulled out another envelope. What are those? He extended the envelopes to me. His long arm stretched nearly the entire alley. I approached the letters cautiously, snatching them, and stepped back. What are these? I muttered, already distracted. They had already been opened, and I took the papers out of one of the envelopes. It was a handwritten letter on college-ruled paper. All the ink was smeared like it had been dunked in water, but I could still read it a bit, albeit slowly. When I was done reading, I let my arm fall down to the side and stared at Chuck in disbelief. Andy had a lover. I looked at the other envelope and hardly had to read it to figure it out. The letterhead read, Atlantic Life Insurance. A policy had been opened in my name for $250,000. I stumbled over to the retaining wall and sat. The pills. I thought about the empty capsule he'd shown me at first that I tossed aside. It was my emergency albatrol. It had to be. A quick WebMD search showed that an overdose started with symptoms of headaches and heart palpitations. Andy's trying to kill me. Suddenly I realised Tall Chuck's arm was around me and he was patting my shoulder paternally. We sat there in silence for a long time. The things you can learn from people's recycling, I said. Tall Chuck nodded and we watched the upstairs light turn on and my husband appeared in the window. He twisted something in his fingers and then tapped it into a mug. A minute later, I heard the back door open. Honey, are you out there? He called. I made you some tea. I guess the homeless around here don't always want change. Sometimes they might just want to save your life.